Yeah, that was not cool. No, he's calling in. He's in Denver. To call the meeting of the UCF Presidential Search Committee to order. Meetings covered by the Florida Sunshine Law. Public and press are invited to attend. Karen, please call the roll.
Chair Beverly C.
Here.
Vice Chair Alex Martins.
Here.
Governor Tim Serio.
Here.
Mr. John Giuliano.
Here.
Dr. Andre Garcia.
Here.
Dr. Michael Georgopoulos.
Here.
Mr. Timothy Hill.
Here.
Dr. Barbara Jenkins. Dr. Victoria Lorzell.
Here.
Ms. Madeline Mills.
Here.
Dr. Cynthia Muniz.
Here.
Mr. David Odahowski.
Here.
Dr. Kathleen Plinsky.
Here.
Trustee William Self.
Here.
Dr. Stella Sung.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Karen. The minutes from the January 16, 2020 meeting were shared with you electronically. They're included in your materials for today. There are no suggested corrections.
So moved.
The minutes stand approved. Thank you. First item on our agenda today is the Presidential Executive Compensation Analysis, which is outlined in Board of Governors Regulation 1.002, Presidential Search and Selection. The board retained the services of the Siegel Group for Presidential Market Compensation Assessment, and today we will hear from Maureen Binder, UCF's Associate Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer, and Jason Adwin, Senior Vice President of the Siegel Group. Maureen and Jason, you're recognized to address the committee.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair C. and members of the Search Committee. On the phone with us this morning is Jason Adwin, Senior Vice President of the Siegel Group. The Siegel Group is a leading provider of human resources consulting services, including compensation and executive compensation consulting, with offices throughout the U.S. and Canada. They have extensive experience partnering with higher education and private and large public research schools. Jason is a national practice leader with Siegel, with 18 years of experience and a particular expertise working with public higher education institutions on executive compensation and competitive market analysis, as well as incentive and variable compensation plan design. I will now turn it over to Jason so he can walk you through the work Siegel performed on the UCF Presidential Market Compensation Assessment in accordance with Board of Governors Regulation 1.002. Jason.
Great. Good morning, Maureen. Thank you, everyone, for having me this morning. Very much appreciated. I'm going to walk through the material today that we produced for the institution, and that includes the methodology of our work and an executive summary. And I'll also walk everyone through some variable compensation alternatives as you respect contract
We can't
for
hear
a
him.
new
You've got to
president.
fix the audio.
I'm sorry.
Karen.
Jason, we need to,
Can you hear me now?
is that better?
Yep. Can you hear me, folks?
Better.
I can hear you all just fine. Can you hear me?
That's better.
Yes, that's
Better.
Is that okay, folks?
That seemed better if you could speak.
There seems to be.
Whatever you can do louder into the microphone, whatever, but that was better.
Okay. All right. Let me start over again. First of all, let me thank everyone for having the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I will be covering the methodology and the results of our market competitiveness study for prospective president for the university. Hey, folks, I'm really sorry here. I'm getting about a 10-second delay on the audio here. I'm going to try to dial back in.
Okay.
Maureen, can you brief it and just let us ask him questions if we haven't?
I'm
Can
sorry.
you brief this?
Actually, I would really prefer that he go through the information. It's pretty technical, and I would prefer that he would do this. This is their expertise, and this is what the study that they conducted, not me.
Madam Chair, if it's your desire and the committee's desire, you could move to another item on the agenda while we work out the audio with our guest on the phone.
Okay, let's do that.
This is Jason joining again. Can everyone hear me?
We want to try it? Yes. All right,
Just loud and clear.
let's try it.
Like, we might hear.
Can you hear me now, folks?
Yes?
Okay, great. All right. Well, I apologize for the technical difficulty, but now that everyone can hear me, I will now walk through the methodology and executive summary of competitive analysis we prepared for the institution, as well as some prospective variable compensation alternatives that you might want to consider in that contract. I'm going to move to page 2, really defines the methodology for our study. We gathered data from the Chronicle Higher Education for the UCF's peers, and there are really two peers that we use, a group of core peers and a group of aspirational peers. Those peers have been your peers for quite some time, and were the same peers that we used a few years ago. We also considered data from all of the state universities of Florida. The data comes from the 2018-2019 survey, which results reflected the student survey 2019. And all the data that you see here in the study was aged to a common point of July 1st, 2020, using update factors of cash compensation. Yeah, folks, I'm sorry. I'm getting notes that they're breaking up, and it's really difficult for me to
Yeah, we
hear
can't.
as well.
This is not
Echo.
acceptable.
Jason, you're breaking up really badly.
Is there another line that you can call me on?
Okay, next agenda item, Alberto Pimentel, Managing Partner of Starbuck Pimentel and Associates, is recognized to provide the committee with a search update. Alberto, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
First item that I'd like to provide information on is an update on the search so that you know where things are and how things are progressing. So for the last month or so, we've been aggressively talking to individuals across the country. And we have, as I mentioned before, we've been focusing on individuals who not only come from outside of higher education, but those who come from within higher education. And the bulk of our energy has been within those, within that group, that category. And so we've talked to sitting presidents, sitting provosts. We've looked at individuals who are VPs of research across the country. We've also been looking at individuals who are currently sitting deans of large, complex schools. In addition to that, we've been looking at individuals who come from education-related organizations but are doing something quite different. The professional associations, we've looked at individuals coming out of the national labs as well as individuals coming out of foundations that all support higher education. And our goal has been to do one of two things, either recruit the individual as a potential candidate or to solicit names from them in order to pursue as potential candidates. Along that line, the numbers of referrals and nominees has been as we expected. So the number of names that are coming through, good, healthy number. So we have well over 100 individuals that have been nominated. And for research of this type, that's about right. And so that number is good. The area that we see a bit of a dip is in the number of applications. We've been forwarding the applications because of a FOIA request, so we are now making those applications public, and we're doing it every week. But you'll notice that the number of applications is rather low. Know that that will continue throughout this search. That is not atypical. That is very typical whenever you have an institution that has been in the press a lot. So I'm going to urge you not to get too concerned or disappointed by that overall number. That doesn't really mean much. What we're looking at and where the focus really should be is on the quality of the individuals that we're having conversations with. And those individuals are going to jump in at the last minute. And they're going to jump in at the last minute for several reasons. One is they want to see what other issues might surface, and that dictates whether or not they're going to be interested, so it will impact that. And second, they're waiting until last minute in order to avoid the disclosure, and therefore the questions and concerns that will arise in the current campus. Very, very typical. So the number that you're going to see that gets impacted and that's very visible is just going to be the total number of applications. Okay? Don't worry too much about that, because what you'll see usually in these type of searches, when people apply, it's everybody from an individual who is unemployed to an individual who works for a retail store to someone who's just a current graduate student. It's always that group. And so the group that you're losing is certainly that larger, broader audience. It will also impact some of the individuals that are within higher education, and primarily because they tend to be a bit skittish. Okay? So knowing that we have issues that are popping up, and I want to just make sure you understand that the issues that are coming up relative to this university, while I realize they're important, when compared to issues that other universities have had to deal with, they just don't rank. They just don't. You know, you look at some of the high-profile issues that have taken place at universities across the country, at high-profile universities. The issues you have here aren't necessarily at the same level or caliber. What is different is just the frequency in which information comes out. And so as a result of that, that does impact how one perceives the role. So know that it is going to have that type of an impact. That said, for those individuals for whom a challenge is something that they're looking for, where what they see is beyond the surface, and you look at the building blocks that you have as a significant institution, those individuals aren't going to be shaken. Those individuals are going to be more and more curious, and that's actually what's happening now. What will happen over the course of the next several weeks is we will continue to release names as we get them, but understand that those are candidates. So those are individuals who have declared their interest in the role, have submitted their CV, have submitted their letter and said, I'm a candidate, you can publicly disclose my name. The individuals that you're not seeing yet are individuals that are prospects. These are individuals who are considering the opportunity. Now, you might notice in our timeline that we're scheduled to meet on March 2nd. And the value of meeting on March 2nd is to review and select those candidates who will be going forward. We're currently middle of February, just about, and you might wonder whether or not we'll have candidates. The answer is yes. What is going to happen, and has already started happening, is what I mentioned the first day I met you all, which is in order to recruit the best candidates, we need to start to do some outreach. That the minute we start identifying individuals who could have potential interest, in order to cut to the chase and not be bogged down by what one might read in a newspaper, it's going to take conversations with individuals sitting around this table. And I told you when that's going to happen, I'm going to tell you it's going to happen. And know that we're starting to do that now. That what we have done is identified a group of individuals that we have been recruiting, that we have targeted, we have been recruiting, we've been bringing them along. They have indicated initial interest in the role. They're not yet ready to sign on the dotted line to say they're going to be a candidate and therefore officially willing to take that next step to be publicly disclosed. But they are interested enough that they want to have some conversations, some more in-depth conversations. So know that we are now starting to schedule those calls with, and we're asking privately some of you to join us in those discussions so that you could help us recruit the candidates. So our goal within the next 3 weeks or so, between now and March 2nd, is to have as many of those conversations as possible in order to get the people in. I need you to know that's happening. But I also need you to know that part of what the discussion that takes place is all about listening to the individual, providing them information, answering the questions, and giving them some honest feedback about their background. What is not happening is no one is being promised anything. Well, our goal with those meetings is strictly to get the individual to become change from a prospect to a candidate. That's the goal. Okay? Now, I talked about the number a dozen, 12. Well, it's about the number of individuals that we're currently courting right now. That number is going to increase and then it'll decrease because it becomes a revolving door, because as individuals start to think about the job more seriously, they start to determine whether or not they're equipped to do it. Just in the last 24 hours, I've had a couple of individuals tell me, I'm not ready for this type of job. Or one individual who simply said, that's not my passion. And I know that in order to be a president, you have to have passion about being a president. And it would not be in the best interest of the university for me to take a job unless I'm really passionate about it. And it has nothing to do with the university, it has to do with the role of president. I don't necessarily need to be that. So know that as we have these conversations, these are the type of outcomes that will happen. Some will back out because they're not ready. Some will back out because their heart's not in it. Some will back out because they just don't think that they're equipped to handle the challenges. And that's okay. That's the purpose of those conversations. Ultimately, we want the best ones to move forward. We want those individuals who feel well equipped and excited and challenged by the opportunities that are here to step forward. And that's the goal. We need to pull those out. We need to tease out that subset from the larger group. So please know that we are having these conversations and that they're going to continue for the next couple of weeks. I just want you to be aware of it as a committee that that's taking place, because I don't think it's fair or transparent not to tell you that that's happening. Yes.
Has the nature of those conversations changed at all since having the compensation study released to you? And have you had any of those conversations since having this study in your hands?
We've just started the conversations, but I will tell you the compensation, it's a funny thing. Compensation has not even come up for any of the individuals that we're talking to. And it's not that it's not important to them. It's just at this point, they want to be excited about the challenges and opportunity. And they've all seen the Chronicle of Higher Ed, and so they know the ballpark that the salary will be in. So it's an interesting thing. It's just not a driver. Talked to one individual the other day who just said to me, to take my current job, I took a significant pay cut. He says, this will probably be a lateral move, but it will be a much more exciting move. It's a bigger, more complex move. So know that compensation, while it's important and it needs to be at a level that recognizes the individual's contributions, it's not likely to be a big driver in this one. Okay. So as we move forward, know that our goal is by March 2nd to have a pool of candidates for you to select and be comfortable selecting from. Understand that the pool will be a bit smaller, but it will be a high-quality pool. And know that part of why it will be smaller is because these conversations are going to be happening, and rather than having individuals, candidates jump in and then ultimately you disclose them and you go through the process and then they drop out at the tail end, what's happening is they're going to drop out on the front end. So that will necessitate then and dictate a smaller pool. But it's the quality. Please know that I've been asked several times whether or not the issues of the last month or so, whether or not it's had an impact. It has. But what I need you to remember is the outcome and that we're pursuing, the goal hasn't changed. The goal is still the same. The goal is you have to get the best candidate. And so I'm not daunted by it. I'm not, it's not a surprise. But the focus has to be on getting the best candidate, not whether or not the issues, this issue or that issue surfacing. We can't get distracted by that. It's too easy to get distracted by that. Will it have an impact? Sure it will. Will it be a significant one? Only if we lose the ones that we want, right? If we lose individuals that we're not all that interested in, then there's no real net impact, okay? Any questions about this? Because it's going to be moving very, very quickly. And I will apologize repeatedly to those who are going to be involved in these conversations that it's all happening in a very compressed time frame. But part of it is a benefit to the candidates, because the candidates would prefer to know whether or not they're going to be jumping in and what that process might look like for them, and the speed at which it'll move plays to their advantage. Again, it's a nice counterbalance to the disclosure piece. Any questions?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Alberto, do you have sort of any, I guess, any benchmarks or standards in your mind for coming back and saying to us, if we need to, March isn't good, we need to push back?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The standard needs to be high, and as I told you when we first met, I tend to be really straightforward. If the pool isn't strong enough, I'm not too concerned about the numbers. You have to have a number of candidates that you could compare and contrast with, right? But if the quality isn't there, I'm going to tell you right up front. Right now, the individuals that we're talking about, they're there. They far exceed the bar, right? Now we start losing them, and we can't hang on to them. Then the problem is going to be there's going to be a group of you that will have engaged in conversations with them, and you will know where the bar is, and you'll be able to check me because you're going to say, you know, this one here is not as good as the one we just talked to. You know, why are we settling? And that's the value of having a few other voices at the table in interactions, because we're gonna kind of balance off each other. So yes, if the quality starts to drop, I will be the first to let you know. But I suspect that those of you who are going to be talking to some of these prospects will be just as quick to tell me that you're not as happy with the quality, because you'll see the drop. Absolutely.
Madam Chair, yeah.
Yes, Michael.
Do you have a sense of whether the compressed time frame is going to affect the number of quality candidates that will step up on March 2nd?
You know, it's an interesting thing. Yes, but in a positive way. I know it's odd to think that you know, the faster you move, it might impact in a negative way. And when you think about it, it actually helps, because when I have that conversation with those prospects who are going to turn to candidates, if I could tell them, you know, within 3 weeks you'll know if you're in or out. Not only in 3 weeks will you know if you're in or out, but let's say you're in. Within 3 days after being in, you'll know whether or not you're in or out. So literally within less than a 4-week period, they know whether or not they're going to be a finalist or semifinalist. I mean, it happens that quickly. From their perspective, if you're going to be publicly disclosed, you want it to be happen in a condensed time frame, right? Because reality is, if they're disclosed on March 2nd, and by March 5th we're interviewing, right? That means that on March 2nd, if they don't make it, they become yesterday's news. No one's going to pay attention to them. Everyone's going to pay attention to the group that's going to be interviewed. And on March 5th, if they don't make it, then again, they're no longer on the limelight, just the individuals who are moving forward. So from their perspective then, that's a good thing. Because if you're going to be disclosed, you want it to happen quickly, you want it to be over quickly. So it's actually been a selling point. Yeah. Any other questions?
Can you give us a sense of what the diversity is like in the pool, in the current pool that you have?
Yeah, if we look at the pool that has applied, not a lot there. If you look at the people that we're talking to, that's where we have the diversity. The challenge is going to be whether or not we're able to keep them in. Okay, it has been a challenge to recruit a diverse pool, but it's kind of the national trend right now. So it's not any different here. There's not any additional challenges other than I think the individuals who are both women and minorities are being very careful about where they select to pursue, what opportunities they select to pursue. So if we can hang on to the diversity that we're building within the group that we're trying to recruit as prospects that are active prospects, then we'll be all right. If not, then we'll come back to you and let you know that we're falling short.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
I do have a request along those lines. I receive regular communications from the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Education and the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. For their January publication, I did not see the position posted. I did not see the information there. I'm not sure if this is something that you would do, Alberto, or this is the responsibility of our HR team. But if we can do a check and make sure that the position is posted in all of the publications that we agreed to in the marketing plan, then I'd appreciate that.
Let me circle back with you, and then I'll check with my office to see if anything was done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? So know that the next several weeks will be very, very active
Right.
in terms of the recruitment process. It's all about getting folks enticed and excited. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Alberto. And we'll do a check on where we are.
Madam Chair, we believe we've worked through the technical issues, and we are going to go back to the compensation study.
Okay, so thank you, Alberto,
Okay.
Maureen, and Jason. You're now back on.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. How is this from a technical standpoint? Can folks hear me in the room?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm sorry for the difficulties before, but I'm pleased to be able to talk to you now about the results of the competitive market study that we did for the prospective president position opening. And during my presentation today, I'm going to walk you through those various results, as well as discuss some variable compensation alternatives that you might consider in any prospective contract design. Just by way of background on page 2, the university engaged us to do this competitive market study, and we've done this work before on your behalf in past presidential searches. And we use as a comparison group really 3 different markets. We use the core comparison market for UCF, which is 11 institutions. There is also an aspirational peer group of 8 institutions, and then certainly the State University System of Florida and its full 12 institutions are also used as a basis of comparison. The Chronicle of Higher Education has much of this data, and we use that for the purposes of comparison. And the State University System reflects the study conducted through 2018 and 2019, and the results are as of June 30th, 2019. All the data presented in this report is updated and aged for July 1st, 2020 as a prospective start date for any president that you bring on board. So the data is current and aged. As you consider the results of the analysis, a couple key terms that I think it's important to understand. Total cash compensation, that is a term that reflects the sum of salary and incentive pay. Total remuneration reflects total cash compensation plus all other compensation, including other taxable benefits, retirement and deferred compensation, and non-taxable benefits. And then lastly, when we present information, we will present it on a percentile basis. And percentile basis really reflecting the ranking in a peer group. And so when we present information, we're going to present from the 25th percentile all the way to the 75th percentile, along with the median. That 25th percentile to the 75th percentile is what we might call the middle 50% of the peer group, which means that 50% of the peers will compensate within that range. 25% of them may compensate higher. That would be the top quartile or above the 75th percentile. And anything below the results is the bottom quartile or the 25th percentile. So just when you take a look at the results, you can consider that accordingly. Let me just stop there for a second and confirm that everyone can hear me still and there aren't any questions.
Jason, tell me what page you want me to show on the slides, please.
Okay, that was just page 2 that we just went over, and now I think we can, if there aren't any questions, we can go to page 3. Okay. Through the course of our study, we looked at total remuneration, and total remuneration consists of salary, bonus, and incentive pay. There's also a host of other taxable compensation and other compensation, which includes tax gross-ups, perquisites, vacation leave, travel, meals, moving expenses, etc. All of that is collected through the course of our study. We also report on retirement pay and deferred compensation pay, and then certainly any non-taxable benefits. Primarily, those are health and welfare benefits and life insurance benefits provided to either the broad employee population at large or any executive benefits on top of that. Maureen, can we move to page 4?
Yes.
Great. So page 4 really is the executive summary of our results. On the right-hand side of the page here, you get to see the 3 various groups and comparisons that we analyzed for the course of the study. Peer group 1 is your core peer group of 11 institutions. The second column on the right is the aspirant group of 8 institutions. And then lastly is the State University System of Florida with 12 institutions. This data presents total remuneration, or the all-in compensation package that can be expected within each group. And if you start at the far left with your core peer group of 11 institutions, you can see that the range of total remuneration at the 25th percentile through the 75th percentile ranges from 546,000 all the way up to just under $1 million at 995,000. Interestingly enough, the median of total remuneration on that group is 607,000. So it's far more skewed towards the lower end of the 25th percentile. So that simply means when you look at the distribution of all 11 institutions, the bottom 5 are highly clustered between 546 and 607, and the top 6 are much more distributed between 607,000 and almost $1 million. Moving over to the aspirant group, you would expect, because these are aspirational peers, for them to pay higher according to the market. And interestingly enough, they do pay higher, significantly higher at the 25th percentile and the median, but the top of the market, or the 75th percentile, not really the top of the 75th percentile, is pretty close to your core peer group at just over $1 million at 1,061,000. Lastly, in the State University System of Florida, peers, same analysis here. 25th percentile is just under 534,000, a median of 705,000 or 704,000, and a 75th percentile of 919,000. Now, if you turn over to the left-hand side of the page, I'm going to break it down in a little bit more detail here. Here we take a look at, they've already talked about the total remuneration, but I want to talk a little bit about the components that make that up. So from a bonus and incentive perspective, one of the things that we've noticed in the marketplace over the last 10 years is that there's been much more reliance on incentive and variable pay, especially for leadership and presidential positions, than there were in the past. And certainly when you look at your group of core peers, about 55% offer an incentive pay to their president, aspirational peers 38%, and then the vast majority of peers within the state university system, all but 3, provide a meaningful incentive to the marketplace. We do quite a bit of work across higher education at public and private institutions, and one thing that we can offer up for your consideration is we've done this work for many of the institutions within the State University System of Florida, and the system is far more comfortable with incentive pay than the marketplace at large. And part of this might have to be due with the funding systems and the performance-based metrics that you use within the state. So I think that's an important consideration, your comfort level with variable pay, especially with candidates, because some of them may be used to it, but some of them may not be used to it. And that's something that, at least in a prospective conference structure and a candidate's risk profile, needs to be considered. From a retirement and deferred compensation standpoint, nearly all of the participants in this study get some sort of state-based retirement or standard retirement from either the private institution that they have, a non-qualified plan, or in many cases, they're also eligible for deferred compensation or non-qualified supplemental retirement income. And in this case, when we take a look at it, 7 of the peers, or 64%, and 75%, or 6 of the aspirational peers, were able to offer meaningful deferred compensation opportunities, well over $150,000 on average in both of those cases. So it's just a supplemental retirement vehicle to support whatever the norm or standard retirement vehicles that exist at the institutions. And lastly, in our analysis of perquisites, we saw that the vast majority offer some form of housing, 73% and 82%, respectively, between the core and the aspirational peer groups. Those are very common, as well as automobile allowances that are also offered. Additional perquisites that we often see in the marketplace can either include social dues or health club dues, and those are usually used for the purposes of entertainment and fundraising. Also, cell phone service, first-class travel, executive life insurance. Those are all what I'll call normal and typical perquisites that might be offered to a role of the president. Let me stop here on page 4, see if there's any questions from the committee.
We're good.
One question. So I'm a little curious when it comes to the aspirational group, when we see those numbers quite separated when it comes to the median. Can you tell us, even for that 75th percentile, are there really just 1 or 2 who significantly impact that average?
Well, it's a small group, and so on the whole they pay more. But it's not just what I'll call 1 or 2. Let me go back to the page, previous page on page 4. The median really is the average of the 4th and 5th percentile points in this institutions of these 8. And so it's not driven by 1 or 2. It's driven really by all of these at the whole. And I don't know if you need to know the names of these institutions, but primarily driving these are the size and complexity of these particular institutions.
Is there some reference to the institutions in this group of 8?
The full compensation details are available in the full study that was distributed in advance.
If you look at page 19 in the full study, they're listed in there.
And if you go to page 11, we actually have the compensation details of each institution. And so you can see that, let me just say, to give a little bit detail, there are only 2 institutions that are below 600,000. Every other institution is over 800,000 in the aspirational peer group.
That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions here? Okay, let's move on to page 5, and there's just really one data point that I want to point out on page 5 here, and we've already covered the other information on the previous page. But you can take a look at the base salary ranges here on page 5, and from a comparison market standpoint, you can see that the median is 500,000, and the aspirational group, it's over 700,000. And then you can see the competitive range for salary and a range spread of about 51%, or 403,000 to 607,000 from a salary standpoint. But it's much more compressed in the 8 aspirational peers, and the range is 635,000 to 717,000, or a range spread of 13%. So I think it was interesting to point out that there's a significant difference in the fixed pay or the salary. And then if you go down and take a look at the pay mix here, pay mix is basically the split between salary and the bonus and incentive compensation of cash and non-cash. And so when you look at the proportion of pay, the total remuneration, about 76% and 79% is provided through cash compensation or salary and bonus, and roughly 24% and 21% respectively is provided through benefits and perquisites and non-cash compensation vehicles. So that's really a summary of the competitive marketplace that you see out there. Certainly the details of all of these particular institutions on a line item basis, executive by executive, is presented in the full report and the full details. If there aren't any other questions, or if there are any other questions, I'm happy to take them now. Otherwise, we can move on to page 6, which is really our introduction to the variable compensation alternatives that are available in the contract structure.
Okay.
All right. So let me just start, if I can, on page 6 with a little bit of an introduction that says, over the last 10 to 15 years within higher education, we've seen a dramatic shift in the nature of presidential compensation. Whereas previously, most of compensation was fixed through salary. There were some what I'll call state-related benefits, and then there might be some executive perquisites that were small and modest. But in that last decade plus, there's been what I'll call an increase in the levels of compensation and the competitive marketplace. And as the competitive marketplace for compensation and levels have increased, boards of trustees have also increased the diversity of vehicles. So rather than simply raising salary, the increase in compensation has come through other forms of pay, specifically variable pay, and whether that be performance-based annual incentives, performance-based long-term incentives, and what we'll call completion or contract bonuses, or basically retention bonuses. Those are all variable cash compensation vehicles that have become far more prevalent in the marketplace. In addition to these vehicles here, there's also become more prevalence of deferred pay and retirement-related vehicles. Today, we're going to talk about how you might structure a contract, and it's our understanding in conversations with Maureen that the goal of the contract and what the institution really is looking for is to provide a market competitive opportunity, provide a vehicle that will incent superior performance and reward that from the institution, but also balance that with retention and promote institutional stability, and that you want the prospective leader to come on board and really complete the contract that you set. So any one of the vehicles, whether they be a performance-based annual incentive, and they are the most common vehicle that you would see out there in the marketplace. So they promote really short-term performance and focus on annual institution goals. They are typically paid out immediately after the academic year or the calendar year, depending upon how the performance cycle works for your particular institution. And within public institutions, roughly 30 to 40% at large presidents now have some sort of annual performance-based opportunity. And in the privates, that's even higher. That's roughly now around 50, sometimes 60%. So we really do see this vehicle becoming more prominent both in usage and in size. You also have the ability to use long-term incentives. These are far less prevalent in the marketplace. A long-term incentive is looking to reward performance over a multi-year period. In higher education, typically a 3-year period or a 5-year period corresponding with the contract and or the strategic plan of the institution. The reward pays out typically immediately after it vests as well, and usually, again, ties to some sort of milestone completion. Performance-based long-term incentives from a prevalence standpoint, probably less than 10% of presidents across the marketplace have some sort of long-term opportunity, and that is much lower in publics than it would be in privates. And then lastly, the third type of variable pay opportunity is the completion of a contract award. And simply put, this is an incentive award payment that incents the executive to stay in their seat through the completion of the particular contract or milestone period. So it's not altogether uncommon to see something like a retention award that might be over a 5-year contract, that there's a certain amount that's paid out perhaps at the completion of year 3, and then a remainder that's paid out at the completion of year 5. Again, I typically see these at institutions that are tend to be a little bit more risk averse, but want to put some sort of variable pay component within the contract for their president. Each one of these vehicles can be used alone, or they can be used in tandem. And it really depends on the appetite of the institution for risk and performance and what they're able to negotiate with the prospective presidents and their own risk appetite. But as you use these vehicles in tandem, one of the concepts that I think is important to keep in mind is that the greater the fixed or the non-performance-based portion of this biz, you would have typically less upside opportunity, and the more performance-based opportunity that there is, there's more upside opportunity. So if you layer the alternatives with an annual incentive and a long-term incentive and eliminate and don't use a contract or a completion award, then you could expect upside opportunity to be far more meaningful than if you use just a completion of contract retention award, where it's really the only risk is in tenure. There is no performance tension or performance risk there. So with that, I'm going to ask Maureen to advance the slide forward to slide 7 to share 3 illustrative straw models that we've put together for your consideration to show how they may work. And I want to be clear here, these are in no way meant to be a recommendation, nor are they meant to imply that these are the right levels of compensation. They're simply meant to illustrate the risk-reward relationships between these various vehicles and how they might be able to be used in tandem. So we've put 3 scenarios together at the bottom of the page. Each one of these scenarios has the same target pay opportunity. So basically $1.25 million is what we're using over the course of the entire 5-year contract. So not in an annualized basis, but a mix of variable pay over a 5-year period. And for the performance-based plans, for the purpose here, we've used a very common and illustrative payout schedule. Basically, if you get below threshold performance, it's 0. A threshold number would be half of the target opportunity, target would be target, and then upside would be at 150% of the target opportunity. So playing out these scenarios here, scenario 1, assuming that there's a total annual incentive opportunity over the 5-year contract of $750,000 and a long-term incentive opportunity of $500,000 in scenario 1. Scenario 2 keeps the annual incentive target at $750,000, but splits up the long-term incentive opportunity into a $250,000 payout and then a completion of contract payout of $250,000. And then scenario 3 really removes the long-term component and puts in an additional $500,000 for the completion of contract. And I'm going to ask Maureen if she can turn it to page 8 to show what these 3 alternatives, when put together, can produce. And if we're on page 8 now, certainly you can see as you move from below threshold to the maximum, your scenario 1, which has the greater performance tension in it, has the lowest payout below threshold. You can see that's all the way 0, and then all the way to the maximum is well over $1.8 million. And so that has the highest risk-reward relationship. Scenario 3, which has the greatest retention component, flips that scenario and therefore has the greatest payout below threshold and the lowest payout for maximum. So I think in the course of your contract negotiations and thinking through, I think the committee will have to think about what is the right balance between performance, tension, and retention, and how can they structure these vehicles accordingly to accomplish the university's goals and objectives, keep the state funding flowing, and also secure the right candidate through some sort of retention payment. So that really covers the nature of our presentation today. Happy to have any discussion about the variable pay or the pay opportunities in the market or any potential contract structure conversations. One thing I might also note here is that these vehicles can also kind of blend into each other. So one of the opportunities that you could potentially do is combine these and say you have an annual incentive payout that is even larger, but once it's earned, you could make a vesting or deferral nature to it and require half of it be paid up front and the other half of it could be paid at the completion of the contract. So Maureen and I, played around with a structure that allows for that type of mechanic. That really does the same things that we're doing here within these three types of vehicles, but in a different, unique format. So it really depends on the goals and objectives that the committee is looking to accomplish, and then I think you can structure the contract and the vehicles accordingly.
Do you have any questions?
I have a question. So just to be clear, so I understand the variable compensation comparison models. In the models that you ran with the remuneration of the existing peers and aspirational peers, do any of those, I see some of them have some fraction of these types of variable compensation. Was that included in the total remuneration to those presidents when we compared?
Yes, absolutely. We prepared the actual payouts in the marketplace for all of your peer groups. So we have data on bonus and variable pay for all of them. Now, we can't always break them out between these various vehicles, but we do know that it is a variable pay vehicle.
So this is fascinating data. Tell me, just so I'm clear, you pull aspirational and peer group from the Chronicle of Higher Education?
Yeah, so the Chronicle of Higher Education.
I'm sorry,
are they say again, please?
That way? I apologize, go ahead.
No, I'd like to hear the question again, please.
The two groups, I'm clear on state of Florida group, but for the peer group and the aspirational group, are they delineated somehow in the Chronicle of Higher Education Executive Compensation Database? Or did you have to run some algorithms to come up with those two groups?
University of Central Florida identifies our own peer group and our aspirational peer group, and then that data is available through the Chronicle of Higher Education.
So, university identified. I'm
Yes.
clear. Thank you.
Often commented that they need to be updated.
I wasn't going to say that.
Yeah.
And at some point, we probably will update them. But for now, those are the ones that we've identified and we've used for several years.
For now.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Maureen.
If there are no other questions, I guess.
Questions for Jason? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Adwin and Ms. Binder, for today's presentation. My question is, were there any unique challenges that you all encountered while conducting this study?
Not really, I would say. This is a pretty standard study for us that we conduct. We do work for well over 40 institutions on an annualized basis doing this type of executive compensation analysis. When we have an institution like yours that's a doctoral institution, The Chronicle is really one of the primary data sources that we use. For master's institutions, they don't have a study like that, so the data sources can be a little bit more complex, and that we actually have to pull and do a contract analysis. So this type of study that we do within these types of peers and doctoral institutions, the data is readily available and therefore is really within, easy for us to put together and serve our clients with. So nothing here that I can report out was challenging.
Thank you.
So, just so you know, we participate, the University of Central Florida annually, we participate in providing data to a number of different salary studies. So the data that we provide goes into all these databases, and all the other universities, most of them participate as well, so that when companies like Siegel and others do these studies for other institutions, that data is readily available. So it's very helpful for processes like this.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Andrew.
Is it worth looking at a subset of, or I guess a subset of the state university system schools that are most similar to us, call them UF, USF, FSU, FIU, FAU maybe, and I don't know, I'm wondering if those numbers those quartiles would look a lot closer to the aspirational group.
They do. The larger institutions in executive pay, it's not surprising that one of the factors, or the predominant factor that drives increased compensation, is really the size and complexity of the institution. And that's driven by a number of factors, but the ones that we primarily use are the ones that you would expect. And that's really operating budget, number of students, number of degrees that are particularly offered in any one year, the number of faculty, research dollars, all of the things that kind of are measures of size and complexity. And certainly the larger institutions within the state system have and meet those criteria, and compensation is structured accordingly.
If you look in the full study that you have been provided in your materials, the most recent presidential search was for the University of South Florida, and that information was readily available. So we included it as a benchmark for you, because we think that certainly that is very relevant.
Right.
That's provided on page 22, where we summarize the contract terms.
Okay, there are no other questions about the analysis, then to allow for committee discussion, may I have a motion to accept the Presidential Executive Compensation Analysis Report as presented, establish the range of compensation as the lowest total remuneration and the highest total remuneration as established by the report, and for the report to be submitted to the Board of Trustees for their approval and use in negotiating the employment contract with the final candidate.
So moved.
I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. The floor's open for discussion. Discussion? Discussion, okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. Okay, so now, let's see. I think we're back to presidential candidate evaluation. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so Alberto.
Madam Chair, if you would allow, I'd like to respond to a question that was raised regarding advertisement.
Sure.
Just so we could
Yeah.
close the loop on that. So I did check with my office. They confirmed that we published the ad in 16 venues. 10 of those venues were either women or minority focused. The ad that was placed in Haku was a 350-word ad. That's all we're allowed to print on that. That was started running the week of December 30th. And so it ran for a 30-day period. So right now it has cycled off. Okay. But it was because Haku limits the number of words, we weren't able to put the entire ad. So what we did was drive the readership to the presidential website. With regard to the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Education, we're trying to confirm whether or not that was placed. That's a membership-only organization, meaning that you could only submit something if you're a member, and it's usually institutional member. So I'll have to check with staff here to see if that was done.
UCF is a member of HAHI, yes.
I need to make sure that that it was placed here. So I'll follow up, and by the next meeting, I'll give you an answer on that one.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
Can you point us in the right direction? I'd like to see it. I haven't seen it, and I'd like to see it.
The ad or
the ad in Haku.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, I have it sent to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So our next agenda items, presidential candidate evaluation criteria. Before I again recognize Alberto to address the committee, I'll note that if approved by this committee today, these criteria will be submitted to the Board of Trustees at their February 20th meeting for approval. Alberto, floor is yours.
Thank you. So often what happens in these search processes is the board will approve a list of large items that are meant to drive the search. In other words, they'll do it at the 30,000-foot level, what they expect the successful candidate to be able to accomplish. And then they entrust the search committee to operationalize that, to break it down into smaller components. So think of it almost as the goals and the objectives. And in doing so, it's then our responsibility to determine how we're going to define and meet those broader criteria. Now, in doing that, we're focusing specifically on how you're going to evaluate the product that you might have, whether it be a CV or a letter or a combination of the two. And so we need to tease out and identify those criteria that you're going to be able to measure. Either be able to measure in terms of the CV and letter or in your actual interview with the candidate. So in order to avoid confusion and to provide very specific items, what we did was we looked at the presidential statement that was produced by the board and identified each item, then below each item, developed a series of criteria that could be used to assess that broader goal. So everything that we developed stretches back to the presidential statement that was developed by the board, as it should be, because they're the drivers. So what we prepared for you in advance then is the criteria that would look at integrity, be able to identify what an anticipatory thinker might look like, how you might see that in their background, the personal and professional academic background to be able to demonstrate where you might be able to see that. And if you just read through the document that was provided, we try to capture each one of those items in a way that provided you with some flexibility so that you could interpret it, but yet with some direction so that we're guided by it. Now, keep in mind that when we start to evaluate backgrounds on March 2nd, what you will have before you is a broader scale so that individuals will either exceed, meet, or not meet the criteria, or frankly, there's going to be situations in which you can't tell. So it'll be need more information. So what we're trying to do is make sure that everything that you're doing is tied back to the presidential statement, but that it all links up. So even when we get to the interview questions will be focused on those items that will help you evaluate the candidate on the criteria, which then ties back to the presidential statement. So for now, what I need you to do is take a look at the document that was provided, the evaluation criteria, and share your thoughts as to whether or not you think it aligns well, or if we missed the target, or if you think that we ought to be changing any of it, then more than open to doing that. And you might have a different interpretation as to how you want to see it play out. So I welcome your comments, and then we'll make the necessary changes.
Madam Chair, if I may? I have
Yes.
2 comments, please. On the second page, where it describes the demonstrated record of partnership, the third bullet, I think it might be worth calling out specifically partnerships with educational institutions, given the strength of the educational ecosystem in Central Florida.
Got it.
And on page 3, the first full bullet where it describes the desire and ability to include access and inclusion, the description seems redundant with the statement about diversity that's on the first page. And when I read access originally, I interpreted that to mean really a commitment to ensuring access to higher education for the local community, as we see with Direct Connect. So I just thought that that might be worth calling out, particularly since it was part of the profile.
Got it. Yeah, so remove the, since it's the duplicate. Got it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Madam Chair?
Yes, I've got a couple, well, I've got one, so overall, I think it's a really good document, and it supports what the board had presented. But on the second page, in the first bullet, on the understanding and respect for the roles of the faculty.
Yes.
I'd really, really advocate that we change the language just a little bit based on the following, and also based on what's on the first page. A respect for the faculty and an understanding of the roles and responsibility of the faculty. I think it's very important to say a respect for the faculty in that bullet when on the first page we say a respect for students. So it's important for that to be parallel in the way that it's stated. Also based on the feedback we got at the open forum at the Faculty Senate, I think reflected that as well.
So what we would want to do is make sure it says something demonstrated or a proven track record, something like that, right? So that we could tie it back.
Yep.
Got it. Okay.
Madam Chair? Just a quick question on Kathleen's question. The partnerships is not only the Direct Connect, if I'm not mistaken, but also a lot of the corporate partnerships and military
Right.
partnerships nearby, right?
Right.
So maybe worth noting not only the Direct Connect partnerships, but also all the partnerships going on kind of in the hospitality world and then also in the modeling simulation industry. And then just a high-level question, comment for this whole process. We're I guess hiring is inherently a subjective process, and this is trying to put a framework and bound it to an objective process. Is it not worth figuring out a way, or maybe there already is enough wiggle room in here to leave the Board of Trustees some room and not bound them so much and handcuff them so much to be able to make some of the subjective decisions they might need to make? Meaning, it is said differently, is this putting too much structure and too much framework and handcuffing the Board of Trustees in making the final decision?
So what we've tried to do is keep it fluid so that because you're right, part of it is going to be subjective. And let's take the issue of partnerships. Partnerships that might take place here may be quite different when you look at someone who comes from, let's say, Minnesota or from Massachusetts. And so we want to leave some wiggle room for this committee to be able to interpret that, and also for the board to be able to look at the same items and perhaps take a different perspective on them. So we do want to not define it so narrowly that that it doesn't allow for that. This is why in the one point of partnerships, I realize you're talking about in general, we've tried to keep it very general. Local industry leaders, right? We've talked about community organizations to give it some leeway and not be so specific to what is happening here in Orlando, or else then the only individuals that match that definition are here. So, but it is fair to be as inclusive as possible. You know, my concern was making it so broad that you couldn't, then everybody meets the criteria, right? So I think we have enough leeway there, but maybe others could weigh in.
I've got just a little wordsmithing.
Yes, sir.
Page 2, second to the last bullet, after the word variety of, insert public, private, and governmental agencies. The ability to work with a variety of public, private, and governmental agencies.
Easy fix.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I would add on the 5th point on the first page, the respect and concern for students, the ability to connect, because I think there can be an understanding of what students go through, but we also want someone we can have a conversation with, and with the interpersonal skills that can go to events with us and understand what we need. So I would add ability to connect.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
To piggyback off of Madeline's point, I would say also with that 5th bullet point, just the verbiage of inclusivity of students for all backgrounds, and some verbiage along with the diversity of students as well.
Madam Chair, I'd like to add on page
Hold
one.
on, let's
Yes.
let him
Oh, sure.
take his notes.
Absolutely.
Okay, Cynthia, go ahead.
Thank you. So, Alberto, with regard to the language, and this could be either the bullet on page 1 that states commitment to inclusion and diversity, or the bullet on page 3, desire and ability to include access and inclusion. Wordsmithing again, but equity, inclusion, and diversity, it would be my recommendation. Being very intentional about the word equity and including that where we can, we would, it would be in our best interest to have an equity-minded leader. So equity, inclusion, and diversity. And also on that bullet for page 1, something along the lines of, the way that it reads, I appreciate the fact that it says strengthening organizational efforts dedicated to the success of diverse populations. The work of equity, inclusion, and diversity is everyone's responsibility, not just those units or those offices that have that particular focus of work. So if there is a way in which we can infuse that somehow into that paragraph, so as to indicate that we are all participant and responsible for the success of that work.
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
So Alberto, let me give him a minute.
Got it.
We just think you can write
Fire
at
away.
phenomenal speed, I'm sorry. So at the bottom of page 2, a keen understanding of the unique mission and the ability to lead a multi-city. I'm wondering if that is somehow limiting. Does the term ability imply they have to have been in a multi-site university?
Yes. Yeah, you're right. Yes. Okay, let me see if we could change the wording. Anyone else?
I got a comment.
Yeah.
I don't think this is going to make or break this document, but on page 2, the 3rd bullet from the end, the fact that it just says including fundraising at the very end in both the topic and the description there, I'm wondering if we shouldn't put more emphasis on as somebody who has experienced fundraising, is committed to fundraising through philanthropy, partnerships, or whatever. Make that more of an emphasis. It seems like including fundraising is just an added bit at the end, and I would like that to be a little bit more prominent.
You're right, because they're two different things, creating new revenue streams and fundraising. Well, the generate dollars, they're very different activities.
Right.
Okay, yeah, let me maybe add another sub-bullet there that deals with fundraising specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, to add to that, kind of a bullet right under that, to leverage your alumni base, to kind of go hand in hand.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Leverage your alumni base kind of goes hand in hand with the comment that John just had.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Madam Chair, one more comment. Sure. On page 3, again, going back to access and inclusion, I'd like to see wording that really celebrates and empowers, right, diversity and inclusion, or equity, inclusion, and diversity. And language with regard to building from our strengths. I think often the issues of diversity and inclusion, I would recommend we not use the word issues, but how do we build from that? How do we work from the strength that derives from an equitable, inclusive, and diverse campus? So there's a lot of richness to that, and how do we showcase that in that bullet or that paragraph? Thank you.
A question, is there a rank order to these qualities, or do these qualities all have equal impact, or can they be grouped some way into the characteristics of the individual, the students, the academic community?
So currently, the way they're presented is consistent with the way the statement came from the board. However, that doesn't preclude us from moving them around. So we could certainly, one thing that is often thought of is that where you have an item on the list shows its priority, even if that was unintentional, right? So what we could do is reconfigure this in a way that that might demonstrate the value system more completely, meaning we put the student issues, we put issues of diversity and so forth up on the front page, and fundraising, and then kind of go from there, and instead of just having a list of items.
Trying to anticipate questions that the Board of Trustees would have passing this along to them.
And keep in mind, this will be while it's a document others will see publicly.
Right.
The reality, it's a working document for us.
Right.
And for this committee.
The idea of trying to at least have groupings so it seems less.
Right. Student, community, and so forth. No problem.
Well, Alberto, I think I sent you an email that Juan Sedan had sent to me that suggested grouping by behavioral traits, personality traits,
Yes.
and then the organizational. And I think that would help get a better picture of what we're trying to accomplish. When I look at these things, I'm always cognizant that are we looking for this superhuman? But as I read every one of these, and everyone's going to have their different styles and representation of these in some form or function, we want them to be able to operate this way. So through AGB, I've always been counseled that no president has everything. You're looking for the best fit, and then work through coaching and the team that's built and the support system to make sure that the leadership is exhibiting all of these behaviors and needs. So, so I just want to be cognizant of that. As I read through this, I didn't feel there was any. Well, there are a few, perhaps. If you're saying demonstrate experience there may be a couple of those where someone may not have that particular experience, but they have all the other traits, and it's a great fit. And how important is that experience? And that's something that the board needs to work on as they select the candidate, and then afterwards transition the candidate and work with the candidate. That's the board's job. So anyway, those are my thoughts about making sure that we're not, looking for a robot here. So.
Excellent. Any other comments?
Madam Chair, I would just like to echo that as far as, I didn't really have any comments on the compensation package for that reason as well, because the compensation of the president's team is going to matter to the board, and that's a whole process. And so it matters the compensation package for the president. It matters what the strengths of the president that they bring. But ultimately, if there's gaps, then they're going to need to fill those, and then the whole compensation of the executive sort of area of the university is really what's at play, and then that's an ongoing board issue. And so we shouldn't dive too much into that, I think, at this level to do that. But that's an important part of those retention, say, goals and things like that.
So it looks kind of like we're moving into discussion, so let me just, ask that we have a motion so that we can have this discussion to approve the presidential candidate evaluation criteria document with the edits that the committee has suggested to be submitted to the Board of Trustee for approval. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion, comments? Okay, so I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed, like sign? Okay, the motion passes. So our last agenda item is online survey feedback. Alberto, you're recognized to address the committee.
Thank you. So we received a total of 678 responses. Good number of responses.
They were hard to read
People
through.
had a lot to say. There was some spam in there, but you take out the spam, there was some very vibrant points. There were several themes that seemed to be highlighted in particular, so let me review some of those with you. There was clearly the need for someone who's going to be able to build a compelling vision for the institution and bring people together to support that vision and allow individuals not only to support it, but be part of it, take ownership of it, and to do so in a way that's inclusive rather than a vision from the top down, really kind of work it from the other way around, of let the vision emanate from those who are going to be asked to implement it. To have a sense of direction for sure, but be open and flexible enough to be willing to adapt to the ideas and the suggestions of those who are here on the campus.
So could I comment
Yes.
on that?
Yeah.
So I think what that requires then is the willingness to listen and create that environment and ask for those opinions.
Yes. Absolutely. It was clear that more communication at all levels is necessary. Because when you boil down much of what was said in the document, it came down to breakdowns in communication. Not to say that people didn't make the attempt, but somehow there was a gap and the handoff didn't actually take place. There was also, as one would expect, discussion about the need to rebuild trust, rebuild the reputation of the institution, the need to connect with the broader community, and the need for whoever comes in to be very much student-focused in a lot of different ways. Part of it is paying attention to students, part of it is paying attention to the student experience, part of it is being accessible. But part of the student experience is also about making sure that the students are successful. So it's not good enough to feel good about being here. You need to be successful and be able to graduate and move on. And that the degree then has to have that greater value to the individual. So when I talk about student focus, please know it's that full spectrum. There was also comments about the need to build a cohesive, well-oiled, well-integrated team. That it's to the comment of the chair made earlier, that it's not just one person's job anymore. These jobs have become very large and complex, and so being able to identify where one might have some shortfalls in their experience base or need some assistance and build a team that collectively will cover all the bases and make sure that everything gets done, and that the team needs to be speaking with one voice and well coordinated, so you don't have individuals who are talented but going off in a lot of different directions. The other thing that came up was the need to enhance existing revenue streams, namely the relationship with the legislature, and being able to develop new revenue streams, to the point that was made earlier, fundraising, developing the relationship with donors, developing the relationship with alumni, and being able to leverage those relationships in a way that will generate not only interest and support, but frankly, new dollars for the institution. It's that recognition that there's a finite amount of dollars that will come from the state, so you need to be much more innovative and aggressive about those other potential revenue streams. Now, there was also a series of comments that were made that seem to come from just recent events. I think they're, and one of the challenges with a survey like this is it does provide an open forum for individuals to share their concerns. And so part of what we saw was some venting, for sure. We also saw that the issues that have taken place in the last 30 days or whatever, the press is influencing what folks are saying. It's immediate. And I'm going to caution you not to react to the immediate, right? Yes, you're in a moment in time, but you really need to look at the longer term, because you have a lot of spectacular things that are happening. And sometimes the immediate issues overshadow those things, and people forget that there's a lot of really good things happening, and there's a lot to be proud of. And that those immediate issues, you'll take care of them. But the issues that are much more important are the longer term issues, right? Establishing what your niche in the higher education market in a more pronounced way. That becomes more important. Making sure that the quality of the institution continues to move forward. That's more important, right? So it was clear that some comments were influenced really by just maybe a frustration and the immediacy of what has taken place. The other thing that was clear is that there was just a variety of different issues that people were talking about. You know, there were a core group of issues, and those are the ones I've talked about. But then there was just a bunch of random conversations and discussion items. And I think part of what happens in these surveys is, with social media being so prevalent, is people feel very comfortable just using these surveys as a way of just sharing their thoughts, whether or not they have a lot of relevance, but something you need to pay attention to anyway, just to see what the overall thought process is, but know that there was a lot of random thoughts there. And then some of it is, you know, there's some comments that, if when you read through it, that were kind of filled with vitriol. I mean, they were just kind of aggressive. And I think some of that is just kind of the overall tone of what's taking place in society at this point. And so, you know, it happens. So I share this with you because sometimes committees read these comments and they start to take a negative tone, right? And I want to encourage you, don't buy into that. It's be aware of what those issues are. You need to acknowledge those that you believe are true and reflect what's actually going on. And then know that your job as a committee is going to be to rise above that and think about the long-term future of this institution, and to look at the future and then try to wind it back and say, okay, so what's that talent that we're going to need to be able to achieve those goals? There are certain things that are absolutely true. The communication piece, that's going to be necessary. Strong interpersonal skills, that's always going to be the case, right? A person with a vision and passion for the institution, yeah, if you don't have that, you're not going to have a good president. Someone who is able to assemble a team, yeah, that's important. Those are the key factors. So again, I just want to encourage you not to get too bogged down in some of the comments. And I realize that there were some negative comments in this. Happens in every search. There is no institution that's perfect. There's always room for improvement. But you have a lot of really good things to be able to focus on, and that's what we need to focus on. Because I promise you, when we're talking to these prospects, we're telling them about the challenges. But as I mentioned before, that's only half the story. The other half of the story is all the good things that are taking place, and that's what we need to focus on. Okay. Any questions about the survey?
Not sure. I can appreciate the Yelp effect, and you know, people only kind of comment on the bad meals they've had. But did anybody comment on doubling down on the things that we do well, athletics or direct connect or anything like that?
There was certainly some recognition of the positive aspects and wanting to support them more fully, athletic support more fully and more extensively. But most of the comments really were about the desired characteristics and less about talking about the good things. And that's what struck me, right? When I was reading through them, I'm like, okay, I get it, but you're missing all the good things, right? You're focusing on the things that you don't have versus looking at the things that you do have. You have a wealth of resources. You have a wealth of talent. You have a lot of really good things. And I think that's the part that we're going to have to keep reminding the campus community about. Because when the candidates finally do come to campus, I don't mind that the challenges are shared with them. But I want to make sure that individuals are also able to articulate why someone should come here. Now, it's a funny thing because on the one hand, the survey reflected and mirrored much of what I heard when we did the listening tour, with the exception of one thing. The last question I asked most groups was, why should someone come here? And that came out in droves, right? A whole bunch of reasons why one should come here. The surveys didn't reflect that. That part was not as pronounced. And that just tells me that we need to make sure that we remind people that in the process of conducting the search, you're buying and selling, right? Sure, you're going to make a decision about whether or not you want someone to come here, but that individual has to make a decision too. And that decision is equally as important and as powerful as your decision. And that is, they want to make sure they're coming to a place where they're going to be successful. And so that means you have to also sell the opportunity. And I think that we're going to have some work we're going to need to do with the campus community to remind them that, hey, you have a lot of good things. You said it to me. Tell it to the candidates, but so that the candidate gets a well-rounded picture of what they're going to be stepping into. I don't need it to be sugar-coated, but I do need it to be real. I need it to be authentic, and just focusing on those things that need to be done, that's not telling the whole picture. So whether it be the campus community or this body here, I'm going to need some help, because we need to tell that full picture. Okay.
Just a comment. I think the full picture of the future of Florida is expressed in the Florida Chamber Foundation Florida 2030 report. And we're going to have 6 million more people here in Florida by 2030. We want good paying jobs, vibrant communities, and want to be internationally competitive. And there's 6 pillars under this plan. It includes education, it includes infrastructure, it includes civic governance, quality of life. And that document sums things up very nicely. We're in a state that's the 17th largest economy in the world. And the goal is to be number 10 in the world. And if you're part of that, and if you're in the middle of the state, and if you're leading this institution, you are going to be a part of that. And the documents online, I'd be happy to get copies for everyone, because I know you know the benefits of living in this state, but it's nicely expressed in that document.
And these are the kind of factors we need to continue to remind candidates about, right?
Great place, Florida.
Okay, well, thank you again, Alberto.
My pleasure.
On behalf of the entire committee, I want to thank our students, our faculty, staff, alumni, friends who attended the open forums, listening sessions, filled out the online survey. We appreciate your feedback and hope you'll remain engaged as we continue the search. I also appreciate the time that many of our search committee members invested in attending those meetings so you could hear the feedback firsthand. Is there any other business to come before the committee at this time? If not, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.